Absolutely. Well, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute. I'm looking forward to digging into your world and what you do. So thank you for taking a minute out.
Just remind me, how long are we going to go today?
Probably about, I would say, tops 30 minutes.
Okay, I'm all set.
Okay, cool. Well, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out. And I want to begin our conversation with 4 years ago, we were trying to figure out this pandemic. How long is it going to last? What are the ramifications of all of it? How did you end up getting through that time period? And how did it change the way that you live your life or you view the world now?
Well, the pandemic actually had less impact on me than on a lot of people because as a writer, as an author, I work at home anyway.
Yeah.
And so staying home wasn't some kind of punishment for me or disappointment. That's just how I lived my life. And during the pandemic, I was working on the Untold Story of Books, and I got a lot of work done. In fact, I finished the book and it came out, and it's being people are into it. So, I mean, I was emotionally impacted, as we all were, and had to deal with the hassles of wearing a mask and shopping at specific times, off hours when stores wouldn't be crowded. But I don't think the writers of the world were as affected as many other people were.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I want to know right now, if you were to be put in front of a bunch of third grade students and one of the kids, it's career day, one of the kids wanted to know what you did for a living, how would you answer them?
I would say that writers think a lot and they write things down. There's a funny old, years ago, before word processing, when people wrote on typewriters, I read an interview with a famous author, and the interviewer was at the author's house, and the author's young daughter came into the room, and the interviewer turned to the daughter and said, "Do you know what your daddy does for a living?" And she said, "Oh, yes, he types on pieces of paper and then throws them away." And that's, I mean, writing is a misnomer. It's mostly rewriting.
Yeah.
But I would say to children that if they're learning how to write and use their letters, if they like to read books, someone wrote those books, and it could be them someday.
Yeah. So what did you want to be when you were in the third grade? What was your dream?
I wanted to be a fighter pilot,
Okay. Okay.
honest. But my eyes started going bad, and I needed glasses. And I learned that I was bitterly disappointed that it would probably condemn me not to be able to do that. Um, but pretty much ever since about sixth grade, I was very interested in the written word and writing, and I was always an avid reader. My mother was a librarian, and my father was a college professor. So there were lots of books in our house, lots of discussions of reading, um, and um, and I just loved it. I like the meditative aspect of writing, where you really have to commune with yourself, and it's quite meditative. And I'm not particularly a social butterfly. I don't. I love my friends and family, but I'm perfectly fine spending a day by myself. And as a writer, I spend 2 or 3 hours a day looking at a blinking cursor and trying to make some sense out of strings of words.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What was one of the books growing up that was seminal in your development that made you either really love reading or made you want to really write?
Well, actually, it was not a book that I read. It was a book my mother read. We're Jewish, and when I was a little kid, maybe about 10 years old, the book Exodus came out by Leon Uris, which is a big, multi-generation Jewish saga. And my mother was so into this book that she skipped making dinner for the family. The only time I ever remember her saying, "Forget it, I'm not cooking for you. I got to finish this book." And I thought, really? What? And and that made a very lasting impression on me that books could be so important that my mother wouldn't feed her family.
That's wild. So let me ask you this. Who's been a hero for you? Someone that's been inspirational in your life?
In the writing game or just in general?
Probably the Venn diagrams will bleed into each other a little bit, but just overall.
Well, I would have to say the rock star Bob Seger.
Okay.
And the reason I was so well, I loved his music, and I grew up in New York. He was from Michigan, and I wound up going to the University of Michigan, and which is Bob Seger's hometown, and he was like, the local rock star. And I saw him frequently at bars and concerts, and I loved his music. And the guy got no respect. He just could not make a breakout hit. He always brought such joy to the stage and worked so hard and sweated up a storm and got no respect for probably the first 15 or 20 years of his career. And at the time, I was struggling with trying to turn my writing into a vocation. And I just thought, God, if Bob Seger can work so hard and be so good and get nothing in return, then maybe I can summon the personal strength to keep writing, to persevere, and keep on keeping on. And then eventually, of course, Bob Seger became a huge star,
Yeah.
and I didn't. But it's okay. I'm
Yeah.
all right. Um, and he did inspire me to keep at it and persevere.
Yeah, there are people around like that where you wonder how it takes so long for them to get to that point. But I think in music, people think that it just kind of happens overnight, and it really does take a while for all the bearings to kind of click together.
Yeah, it's an old story that somebody who's been around for a long time says, after 50 years in the business, I'm an overnight sensation.
Yeah, right.
Nobody's an overnight sensation.
Right. Absolutely. So let me ask you this. If you could meet one person right now, whether it's an author or otherwise a contemporary, who would you love to meet and talk to? Someone that fascinates you?
Someone who's living today,
Yeah.
Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
I love Bruce. I love his work. I'm a rocker,
Yeah.
and I've loved Bruce since his very first record. I have seen at least one show of every tour since 1975.
Wow.
I saw him twice this year.
Wow.
Um, and what can I say? I'm a devoted fan. I love the guy, and I think he's a brilliant poet and writer. I think he really taps a deep vein of working class sensibilities in America. He's Italian, which I'm not, but my hometown was heavily Italian. And all of the Italian rockers, all the Italian pop stars were huge in my hometown, like the Four Seasons and Fabian and Bobby Rydell and Frankie Avalon, but particularly the Four Seasons, Dion and the Belmonts.
Yeah.
So I was very into Italian pop stars, and Bruce just blew me away. I had a friend who was from New Jersey who returned to Michigan after a vacation with this album and said, "You've got to listen to this guy." And I did, and I was hooked from the first listen.
That's great. That's the one guy I've not seen live and I need to catch him live. And he comes through Kansas City. Yeah.
He's I mean, he's, in his mid 70s now, so he
Yeah.
doesn't jump off the piano anymore.
Yeah.
But he's up there. He put on a 2.5 hour show with no breaks between songs. I
Yeah.
mean, just one into the other. The guy is a marathon runner.
Uh-huh. He is. That's the thing that's amazing. So let me ask you this. What was the first concert you saw as a kid that blew you away?
Um, the first concert I saw uh, was Iron Butterfly opened for the Jefferson Airplane,
Wow.
Westbury Music Fair on Long Island. And
Wow.
I was 17. I had just gotten my driver's license. And I did not take the train into New York City or Brooklyn to see rock shows. I just didn't do that.
Yeah.
But as soon as I got my driver's license, I thought, hey, I can drive to Westbury and start seeing concerts. And so I did. And and it was amazing because Iron Butterfly had just released Inagata Devita. I don't know if you
Uh,
remember that
oh
one,
yeah.
but a seminal piece of 60s rock. And then the Jefferson Airplane came on and absolutely blew my mind by smoking marijuana on stage in 1967 in New York, where it was, doing that could land you in prison for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I was just completely blown away. And I loved their music. I loved their first record. Um, but it was the weed that made it memorable.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What is a motivation for you every day to get up and to construct these stories and to string these words together? What is that motivation for you every day?
I don't know. I've always been driven. I am I just I don't crawl out of bed in the morning. I jump out of bed. And I'm always eager to get to work. I love to write, and I've always just been, I guess, industrious, and it's just a personality thing of mine. I'm not lazy. I have friends who complain that they're lazy. It doesn't compute with me. I always need to feel like I'm doing something productive,
Yeah.
and writing and rewriting um, is what I do.
So what was the first story that you wrote where you got a response that really made you feel like this is what I need to be doing with my life?
Well, that would have been in 1973. I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I started writing health articles for an underground newspaper. I was working at a free health clinic, and it was abundantly apparent to me that if people had a little health information, they wouldn't have to come into the clinic so much. And so this local alternative weekly was published, and I approached them, and they said, sure, sure, you write health articles. And then as Valentine's Day was coming up, the editor of the newspaper said to me, Mike, we need an article. We need a cover story for Valentine's Day called How to Make Love. And you're the health writer. You're the logical guy to write it. So I need you to write it. And I said, I'm 23 years old. What are you talking about? I don't know anything about this. Um, and he begged me, and I refused. And then I walked home. My home was about 10-minute walk from the newspaper office. And when I got in the door, my girlfriend, who is now my wife of 50 years, said to me, Mike, what do you mean you won't write that article? Write that article. See, the editor knew my girlfriend, and he called her as I was walking home and said, you've got to get him to write this thing. So I so I said I would. I did it, and uh, and I read a bunch of books. And there was a sexuality program at the University of Michigan, and I interviewed a few people. And when that article came out, I got a lot of good feedback from it. So much so that writing about sexuality is something I've done ever since. I've been writing about sexuality for almost 50 years. I've written 3 books on the subject. I have a blog on Psychology Today called All About Sex that has 60 million views. Sexuality is a subject of perennial interest, and there's a lot of research that comes out that never gets beyond the obscure academic journals. And so it's my job. I've taken on the task of translating arcane academic research into readable journalism that's accessible to regular old folks.
But when it comes to writing about sex, it seems like a lot of women do that. You don't see a lot of men doing that as much. Is that true or is that a perception?
Um, Yes, that's basically true. And the whole health area is mostly female. But of course, there are men who write about sex.
Yeah.
In the From 1990 to 1995, I answered all the sex questions that came into the Playboy Advisor, if you remember Playboy.
Yeah.
And Playboy had an editor of that section who used to write the answers. Um, a, a, um, a very nice guy, a man. Um, and he read my first sexuality book and called me up and said, I love your book. Would you please be an informal advisor to the advisor? If I have a question, can I call you? I said, sure, I'd be thrilled. And then about a year later, he said to me that there were some changes at the magazine, and how would I feel about answering all the sex questions? I thought, oh, I hit the lotto here. At the time, the Playboy Advisor was the number one source of sex information for young men in America.
Wow.
And so I wrote those questions. I answered those questions for 5 years.
Wow. That's crazy to think how many minds you help shape with all of that information. Is that mind-boggling sometimes to think about that?
Uh, yes, it as the editor used to say, writing for the Playboy Advisor, it's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it.
That's right. I love it. So let me ask you this. Writing the book, The Untold Story of Books, almost seems like a misnomer because you're getting it published, you're in the publishing world, but I would imagine there's a lot of things about the process that are rather arduous. What was it like to write that book?
It was the hardest, longest, most frustrating book I've ever written. I've written 19 books.
Yeah.
And the typical book, I would write a book proposal, it would sell, I would write the book in a year, and it would come out. With The Untold Story of Books, I researched that book for 44 years, and I wrote three drafts. I wrote four drafts over 18 years, and the first three drafts did not sell. And the reason they didn't sell was that I was just a little bit pissed off at the publishing world for how it had treated me and how it routinely treats non best selling authors. And that anger came through. And of course, publishers didn't want to publish something that just flailed them.
Yeah.
And so one reader, a professional writer and editor who I know, read the first draft and said, Mike, there's great stuff in here, but have you ever considered anger management? And so in drafts two and three, I tried to wring the anger out of the book and just present it in a matter of fact way. And still nobody bought it. And then I happened to be listening to music and on shuffle, an Elvis Costello song, Red Shoes, came up. And it's a great song. And the first two lines of it are, I used to be disgusted. Now I try to be amused. And I thought, bingo, wait a minute. Instead of being angry, maybe I could just play the 600-year saga of publishing for the sardonic humor that's in it, because there's a lot of stuff that's kind of funny
Yeah.
in there. And so I wrote a fourth draft uh, that played for the humor, and lo and behold, the thing sold.
Wow. You know what's interesting about you mentioning that being a music lover? Was that the song that he played that Lauren Michaels banned him from SNL? Do you remember that?
I don't know. I don't know if that's the song.
Yeah, I don't know if it is either, but for some reason when you said that, my radar is just bleeped off and I was like, red shoes. It's like something in me, but I remember reading something relatively recently talking about everybody that's been banned from that show, and I knew Costello was, and there was a song. So anyway, I'll have to do some recon on that, but
Well, he can be, I've seen him several times, and he's a brilliant musician, a wonderful lyricist. I love the guy, but he can be testy on stage. And so maybe that played into it.
the only show that I ever went to where I was told up front the lead singer is going to dictate whether this is a good show or not, was Radiohead in St. Louis back in 2005. And they said if Tom York isn't feeling it, and he was on it that night. You talk about writing a book about the publishing industry. He was railing on Clear Channel because that was around the time where they were trying to get ticket prices figured out. There was a lot of corporate things that were kind of flying. Anyway, it was a good show. He was in a good mood. I was happy. So,
Good.
yeah,
Glad you liked it.
it worked out. So, let me ask you this. Of all of the books that you've read, you have to get this flood of letters and responses from readers. What's been one of the most impactful letters that you ever got that kind of threw you off guard?
Um, well, I get a lot of thank you notes from my sexuality writing, but I also get a lot of anguish of people who say, I have this problem. And that's why I launched a sex Q&A site on that's on the internet called greatsexguidance.com, where I answer people's sex questions for free. And well, for example, recently I've gotten some feedback. There's a lot of research showing that when people lose weight, they have better sex. And it makes sense because people who lose weight generally feel more attractive, and so they radiate more attractiveness. It takes a lot of energy to carry around excess weight, and that saps sexual energy. And it's fairly obvious. And when I've written about that, I've gotten a torrent of hate mail from people who say you're fat shaming me. And my response is, I don't mean to shame anybody.
Right.
I, plenty of people who are heavy have wonderful sex lives, and I mean, look at Lizzo, for example.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm just a reporter reporting on the research. So, if you're offended, I'm sorry, but I gotta call them like I see them.
So what's the best advice you've ever gotten? You're giving advice, you've talked about it. What is the best advice you've ever gotten?
The best sex advice, the best advice in general.
In general, probably. I mean, we could go down both roads.
um, I think the best advice I've ever gotten is to show up and persevere. You know, people used to ask Joe Montana how he got so good at football. And his response was, well, I went to practice.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. You have to put in the work. And so the writing game is very challenging. It's very hard. It's not, there's no clear path. My wife is a doctor. In college, she decided she was going to be a doctor. She applied to medical school. She went to medical school. And at the end of medical school, bingo, she was a doctor. But when do you become a writer? You start writing and you think, I don't know, am I a writer? I started publishing little things. Am I a writer? I don't know. I published my first book. Am I a writer? I don't know. Um, it's just a matter of showing up and persevering and doing your best and keeping at it. That's really it's that old saying that success is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. I think that's really true.
It's interesting. It's that Malcolm Gladwell notion of 10,000 hours, you become a master of something, you know?
Right.
It's kind of like that. So I gotta know, my brain's just really on this music track that you have because you're probably get talking a lot about writing and literature, but I'm really also interested because I think it feeds into what you do. What band is alive and out there right now that you have not seen that you want to see,
That I've not seen.
that you haven't seen live yet?
Um, well, there are a lot of dead people that I would have liked to
Right.
see, but live people, I pretty much see most of the live people I want to see. I'm seeing the
Okay.
Rolling Stones tomorrow night. Um,
I got to see those guys, man. I got to catch them. And where are they playing?
they're playing at the 49er Stadium, Levi Stadium in Santa Clara.
Wow.
I saw them there right before COVID, and they're back. And and they put on a killer show.
No, I can't. It's like Springsteen. Those guys are just monoliths, the energy and timelessness.
They're ageless. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. Mick
Oh,
is pushing 80 and he bounces around the stage like a 30-year-old. It's just it's an inspiration. I keep thinking if Mick can do that, I can keep writing.
that's it. I remember reading the book, the Keith Richards biography,
Oh, I love that.
autobiography. Yeah, and I still can't believe how much he ingested. And the weird thing about that is that I went to Seattle in 95. I think it was 95, 96, and I looked through their little weekly alternative magazine, and I was staying with some friends, and they were like, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to see the Grateful Dead. I have to see the band." That
Oh
was
yeah.
crazy. That just all the horses and the security and just everybody floating around in this haze of just being at a show. And it was within 2 weeks after that that Garcia died. And it was
Wow.
after he cleaned up, he went to rehab and got on methadone. But I think about that with Keith. Like Keith has to moderate that diet of good and bad, I think, to keep himself like on the straight and narrow.
Well, what impressed me about his autobiography was that his persona is so dissolute and such a, drug addicted, loser who got lucky.
Yeah.
Um, but you read that book and you realize that's just an act. I mean,
Yeah.
he's actually a very thoughtful guy. He's very intellectual. He's extremely well read.
Yep.
He studies other songwriters. I mean, he has riffs in that book about how he loves Hoagie Carmichael,
Uh-huh.
and it made me realize, oh, it's kind of an act,
Yeah.
and he wants to act that way, but actually, that's not who he really is.
Yeah. That's wild. And then, of course, Johnny Depp ripped off his kind of persona to be a pirate in the big enterprise. It's
Right,
funny how that
right.
happened. So, of all of these things that you've done and accomplished, you're a very accomplished pro. What are you the proudest of? What ultimately rises to the top for you?
Um, I would have to say that the 19 books I've written.
Yeah.
Um, when I was a young man, when I was in college, I'm 74 right now,
Wow.
and so 50 years ago, I thought, oh my God, I would love to be a writer. I would love to do this. I don't really know how to do it, but other people do it. And so, maybe I can do it. And I just kept plugging away. And 19 books later, I am a writer and I'm proud of that. And it's not an easy way to go. I mean, no career is easy, but the writing game is very tough because there's no clear path to success. And I've never earned a living writing books. My income for most of my life was as a magazine writer, which was much steadier money. And then when the internet killed half of the nation's magazines, I bought some property and now I'm a landlord, but I still write books. And that's what I'm most proud of. Uh, my mother died recently at 99, and we cleaned out her house. And it got me to thinking what my legacy would be when I die. And, the family photographs and this and that, they're all nice. But I was thinking the main thing I would want my children to keep would be one stack of my books, every
Yep.
one of the 19 books and the stack is about 30 books high because several of my books were published in other languages. And so I've got this stack of about 30 books with my name on it. And that's what I'm proud of. And that's what I see as my legacy.
So at the end of the day, everybody sees you in a different light. Everybody that reads your books, family, friends, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Um, I like to think of myself as an industrious, hardworking guy. I have a working class sensibility that you get up in the morning and you go to work, and that's what you do. And yes, you have friends and family, and you love your loved ones, but I've always defined myself by what I'm producing and I like to be productive.
So let's climb into the time machine. Let's go back a minute here. What show are you going to see if the artist that's not around? What musician do you want to see live?
John Coltrane.
Man. So,
I and Bill Evans, John Coltrane and Bill Evans, who played together in Miles Davis's band on Kind of Blue, but um, both of them were alive. I could have seen them. That's what really upsets me. Um, I uh, I could have seen John Coltrane in New York. I could have seen Bill Evans, but I just wasn't quite enough into jazz at the time, and they were the two who got away. I was just getting into jazz as they both died, and
yep.
I thought, oh God, this is a tremendously missed opportunity. I mean, I wound up seeing Miles Davis. I've seen a lot of really excellent, fantastic jazz players, but Bill Evans and John Coltrane are two of my favorites, and they were the ones that I just never saw.
I in my bread and butter for doing radio is jazz. And I reviewed the book by James Kaplan, Three Shades of Blue. It was about the making of Kind of Blue.
Right.
You have to get that book. He goes basically what he is. He's a young reporter. His brother got him on assignment to go up to Miles's penthouse, and he had no idea about jazz. He kind of billed that he was an expert. So he's walking into the lion's den. I mean,
Yeah.
Miles is not the kind of cat that's going to be tender with anybody. Anyways, they had such a great talk. He came back the next day and it was great, but he really breaks down all the players. Bill's life, John's life, Miles's life. You got to get it. It's done brilliantly. It's done very well. It's selling really well, and I interviewed him about it, and it was such a great read. So if you can't see him live, at least get into this and kind of feel like you're getting teleported there.
All right.
Yeah,
I'll do.
it's great. So if anybody wants to get your books, where's the best place? I mean, I know there's the usual sources, but I just want to make sure I cover all my bases. Anybody wants to reach out or get your books and your work, where do they go?
Well, all my books are on Amazon, and my new book, The Untold Story of Books, is on Amazon and bookshop.org, which is the nonprofit competitor for Amazon that's getting bigger. Um, and um, and any bookstore can order the book if you walk in and say you want it. So it's unlikely that the typical bookstore is going to have it because most bookstores only stock a small fraction of books.
Yeah,
But it's available, as they say, wherever fine books are sold.
right. I got to tell you, man, for 74, your spirit and the way that you don't look like it. You don't come you have a very youthful glow about you. So keep doing the good work, man. The writing is doing good.
Thank you so much. I'm trying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to meet you, man. Keep doing the great work. Thanks for taking a minute out for the show today. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate being on.
Yes,
Bye,
sir.
Joe.
Thank you.